Had the government not stepped in, it really would have come to an end.
Should the government have spent billions of dollars of taxpayer money in bailing out the banks?
I think they had no choice. I think they had to do it, yes.
Why?
The alternative was worse. Letting the banks all collapse, which would have spread across the world because banks lend to banks. So the interconnections were such that they just couldn't allow a meltdown of that scale. And we see in the Lehman bankruptcy that we're, I don't know how many years since, but it must be 3 or 4, and they're still unraveling the bits and pieces. And had it been the whole system, it simply would have been a calamity that from a societal point of view would have been worse. So I think they had no choice. They did have to bail them out. And they did do it, and it did succeed.
But they left in place the very people who had driven the ship into the iceberg.
I'm quite surprised at that. It clearly has not been a clean sweep. In other words, those of us who made mistakes and so forth and so on are still floating around the system. And
floating it? You're running it.
Well, I am.
You're not running it. They're running it.
But there are many who are. I wasn't involved, obviously. I had retired in the year 2000. We're not talking 2008. So I was a knowledgeable spectator, but certainly not a participant. I was quite surprised because, frankly, the worst thing that can happen to a businessman, that's the sign of ultimate failure. You ran a business and it was unable to succeed under the terms and conditions of private capital, namely you went bankrupt. It's not a crime, but it certainly is a mistake. And these companies, even though they didn't have to file for bankruptcy, de facto went bankrupt. And so the managements and the boards and the regulators should have, in my mind, stepped aside.
How hard was it for you to go before Congress in 2010 and say, I was wrong, I made a mistake? In fact, you said we created a monster.
Yeah. No, look, you don't like saying this. The hard part probably preceded my testimony by 2 or 3 years, where I came to recognize and feel, and I still feel bad. And I feel bad for the people of Citibank who lost jobs and, so forth and so on. But not to mention our stockholders. But, I am a realist. I try very hard to be honest with myself and honest in what I, say. And facts are facts. I've seen Sandy a couple of times, not
Sandy Weil.
Yeah, Sandy Weil, and I started to say, Sandy, we didn't do very well, and he's not comfortable with that conversation at all. I think he would still defend that it was a good merger. It just went off the tracks afterwards.
When it went off the tracks, John, millions of people lost their jobs. Millions of people lost their homes. Millions of people saw their savings.
Well, if you look at the lost product in the United States, in other words, the difference between our current economic trajectory and the potential economic trajectory, you're talking about trillions of dollars. And those dollars are jobs and output and so forth and so on. I mean, we over-leveraged, and that was because, we were creating mortgages so as to sell them into the market, and we were creating them from customers who probably should not have been borrowing. They didn't know what they were originating, didn't know who was buying it, and they didn't care. They were getting paid commissions along the way. And that's a fundamentally flawed system. If you say to what is your objective? And he says, my objective is to make money. There are no boundaries on that. I mean, it's only the law as to what you do in the middle. It would be better if you said, I'm in business to serve my customers or to create a product like an iPad or what have you, but something that has intrinsic value. And all of a sudden we change to, hey, I'm not totally sure what we're doing here. Maybe it's not right, but you know what? I'm getting paid my commission. And that mindset took over. And a lot of that money did flow into the political coffers. There's no question.
What do you mean?
Donations. If you're rolling in money in a business, it's very easy for you to have a PAC and to contribute to campaigns and so forth and so on. And we went through a period of time when there was an immense amount of money. I don't mean small. I mean, this is the biggest economy in the world, and we went from 15 to 25% of the economy.
The financial community.
The financial
industry.
The financial sector, yeah. But the point is, our government is designed fundamentally to be dumb, but to listen. In other words, no one is elected to the government because of their personal expertise in the various issues that they're going to have to deal with. We have a system that is designed to listen.
But if money gets you
access.
greater
Unfortunately, the talk of what you're listening to gets distorted by the money issue. In other words, they're not randomly listening to the population at large. They're listening to people who have a strong voice because they're strong contributors and so forth and so on.
Well, I think you've taken us to a very fundamental issue that's roiling the country at the moment, and it is that this is democracy is no longer a level playing field, or even approximately a level playing field. The big institutions have so much money that they can flood into the system. There's one study I saw just the other day that reports the number of people lobbying today on behalf of the financial industry to try to weaken Dodd-Frank, the bill passed after the disaster, outnumbers consumer, union, and other groups by a ratio of 25 to 1. The financial industry is outspending everybody else 25 to 1 to try to weaken Dodd-Frank.
I'm quite surprised that the political establishment would listen to groups that have been so discredited.
You're saying despite what happened in 2008, Wall Street still has too much power.
They have too much voice. They're being listened to. And, I find it incredible. I would have guessed that society at large would have said, hey, we made a mistake. Let's get some rules. I used to tell my kids, why do you think a car has brakes? And they all would say, to stop. And I'd say, no. A car has brakes so that you could drive fast. If you got into a car that had no brakes and you knew it, how fast do you think you would drive? You wouldn't drive very fast at all. And that's the same reason we have rules. You want the private sector to be free, to be creative and exuberant and whatever within a framework.
You testified in front of the Senate Banking Committee. You came out in support of what we call the Volcker Rule. For the layman, what is the Volcker Rule and why do you support it?
The rule simply says if you have a customer who wants to issue a bond, you could help him, but you can't trade in the bond market for your own account. And so what the rule does is it basically puts the banks back into the customer business and allows the Wall Street community to be in the pure trading funds and so forth, and it separates those.
Sounds to me like you're calling the Glass-Steagall Act back from the grave.
I think I am.
Because?
I just think it's better that we have that barrier than not. It makes sure that the FDIC guarantee doesn't provide a funding base for proprietary trading activities. Because remember, the government guarantees your savings account and mine in the local bank. And correctly, we don't want the government's guarantee for those accounts to act as a funding base for somebody who's speculating in the market. And so it's that kind of separation. It's a prudent barrier, and I'm astounded that anybody would be against it. And mind you, I'm a private sector guy. I'm not suggesting over government. You need rules. I would never let you or a friend or my kids drive a car without brakes.
Can buy the rules they want.
Then you've got an unstable situation. That's an intolerable situation. I mean, obviously.
So do you have any sympathy for Occupy Wall Street, the movement that is in a very inchoate but nonetheless persistent way trying to get us to pay attention?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I mean, I think it's symptomatic of the in our discourse now. We're not to understand fully what went on and the implications of it, and a political establishment that doesn't seem to respond very well. They know a lot about the concerns, but they seem not to be able to do anything about them. And the folks in the financial system are not listening. They're not saying, you know what, there's some correctness in these views. And so I think these people are giving voice to a frustration, and I am quite understanding of it. I hope the political establishment has some ears. I understand the political divisions, but they've got to start understanding that at some point you got to come together.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.